All right, so I totally ran out of time on that last video, and the screen recorder just cut me right off. So we left off with Clostridium difficile, or C. diff. That usually occurs in hospitals and nursing homes. Usually elderly people, they have, an extra difficult time with this one. And I have been told by nurses that the smell from the diarrhea is quite the most horrendous thing you'll ever experience. So that's what Clostridium difficile is. Just waiting for the computer to, there we go. Bacillus cereus is a gram-positive spore former that resembles the symptoms of gastroenteritis caused by Clostridium perfringens. I actually leave this one in here in this list because a couple years ago there was a news story about a college student. It was a perfectly healthy, normal male, early 20s, and he actually ate some spaghetti that had been left out overnight. So I guess basically he got up in the morning, he was hungry, he saw the spaghetti sitting there, he ate it. He actually got very, very sick a couple hours later. He fell asleep on his couch, and they actually found him dead. And when they did the autopsy, it was this organism. It was Bacillus cereus that actually killed him. So it's, another example of food preparation and food storage, how important it is. If he would have, cooked that spaghetti really well, it, could have made a difference in whether or not he survived. Um, but just having food left out overnight and then just consuming it the next day, usually not a good idea, especially depending on what type of food it is. But just about anything, certainly needs to be put in the refrigerator. And then you guys have probably heard of Helicobacter pylori before. This is the bacteria that's been linked to the cause of gastric and duodenal ulcers. So stomach ulcers, if you know someone who's gotten a stomach ulcer, that's caused by Helicobacter pylori. Okay, so before we're all totally finished up with the bacteria, I forgot to tell you, in the book on page 720 and 721, there's a really, really good story about cholera. So not only do I want you to know everything about cholera from the PowerPoint slide, I want you to watch those cholera videos that I have posted onto D2L. I also want you to read about it in the book. Okay, so pages 720, 721, read through those couple pages about cholera. Okay, now we're going to do the viruses. So one digestive system disease caused by a virus is mumps. Mumps is an infection of the parotid salivary glands, which is one of the three types of salivary glands up in the mouth. And the reason that mumps is a very rare disease is because of the vaccine. It is part of the measles, mumps, rubella, or MMR vaccine. So if you have, again, pre-coronavirus, if you watch the news, before the coronavirus outbreak, there was actually a couple local cases of, I think it was high school and college students who were actually coming down with the mumps. And it was because they never got the MMR vaccine. So their parents decided, no, my child is not going to get the MMR vaccine. And then they end up with mumps. Mumps can actually be dangerous, especially in males. It can actually lead to sterility in males. So, it's definitely not a disease we see very often anymore because of the vaccine. But as more and more people are electing to not get vaccines, you're going to see an uptick in these diseases like measles and mumps. Okay, so gastroenteritis caused by a virus, it's usually caused by rotavirus. Um, a lot of times what happens with this is, if you have really, really bad gastroenteritis and, severe diarrhea, maybe, severe vomiting, you go to the doctor, they try different medications, they do blood work, and if they rule out salmonella, they rule out, cholera, E. coli, food poisoning, they rule out everything, right? Then they'll usually say, oh, it must be viral. There's nothing we can do. You just have to stay hydrated, stay at home, and you'll get better. And that's a lot of times that's what happens. So normally that's rotavirus. So again, it's transmitted by the fecal oral cycle. So very important to wash your hands after you go to the bathroom. It's, you know, much more common and much more dangerous in developing countries because they don't have the rehydration therapy. You know, they don't have hospitals where they can go to the hospital, get admitted, get an IV put in their arm to keep them hydrated. You know, that's a very, very common thing, you know, in this part of the world. In other parts of the world, they just don't have that. So the person suffers with diarrhea and vomiting, and then they can die from dehydration, which is, you know, really terrible. Other viruses that can cause gastroenteritis are called noroviruses and caliciviruses. They're, you know, certainly more rare, but oftentimes these are the viruses that will cause gastroenteritis outbreaks on cruise ships. So for whatever reason, these viruses just prefer the cruise ships over the just normal everyday stuff. So we are going to talk about the liver because it is an accessory organ of the digestive system, but we're also talking about these because these are common disorders, and these are disorders that you're going to run into a lot in the medical field, and you have to protect yourself from these disorders. So we're talking about the different types of hepatitis. Hepatitis means inflammation of the liver. They're all a different kind of class of viruses. So when we say things like hepatitis A, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, these are all different types of viruses that cause inflammation of the liver. So hepatitis A is often subclinical. So it often goes unnoticed unless, you know, for whatever reason the person is hospitalized for a different, you know, reason, and they run the blood work and they find that the liver is struggling to do everything it needs to do. Hepatitis B is the form of hepatitis that's considered to be an STD or STI. You can get hepatitis B through sexual contact, but you can also potentially get it just from working around blood. So someone who has hepatitis B, if their blood, you know, gets in your eye or your mouth or an open wound, you know, nurses, doctors, they're exposed to blood, and that, you know, that can pass the disease on to you. Often the hepatitis B, if it's not properly monitored, if it's not properly treated, it can lead to cirrhosis, which is hardening of the liver, and it can also lead to liver cancer. So as a result, the hepatitis B virus is considered to be an oncogenic virus, which of course is a virus that can lead to cancer. Hepatitis C is usually from blood transfusions. This is also a danger for people who work around blood. It's not as dangerous as hepatitis B, but it certainly is, you know, another thing to be concerned about. That's why anytime, you know, a doctor or a nurse is working around blood, or if there's a patient who's been in an accident and there's blood everywhere, you know, you have to have the gown, you have to have the gloves, you have to have the, you know, face protection. You want to have all that to make sure the blood does not get into you in any way. And then hepatitis C will often go undiagnosed until liver failure actually begins. So one of the major signs of liver failure is jaundice. Yellowing of the sclera, the white of the eye. If the white of the eye has a yellow tinge to it, you got to get to the doctor right away and get tested because hepatitis could be one of those issues. Hepatitis D is a co-infection with hepatitis B. So if you come up positive for hepatitis D, you also have hepatitis B. You can't have D without having B, okay? You can have hepatitis B and not have hepatitis D. But if you have the D virus, then you also have the B virus. That's just kind of how it works. And then hepatitis E is a virus similar to hepatitis A, and it's more found in areas that have very poor sanitation, and this virus is especially dangerous to pregnant women. So make sure you know these 5 different types of hepatitis viruses and, you know a little bit about each one. All right, so now we're going to talk about fungal infections, which there isn't a lot here. and it's mostly toxins. It's toxin based, not necessarily organism. So the first one is called ergot poisoning. It's caused by a fungus called Claviceps purpurea, and this is actually an infection found on a lot of crops such as corn, and it's called smut. So the infection on an ear of corn would be like if you get ears of corn from the grocery store and you're ripping the outer layers off, and if you see, it'll be kind of like a black fuzzy spot on the corn. That's what that is. So it's fairly common. So if you get a big bushel of corn, there's a chance that maybe one of those ears of corn are going to have it, and you just throw it out, don't eat it, and then you just move on to the next ear of corn. But that fungus can cause major gastrointestinal problems in humans. So if you were to consume that fungus, you would get what's called ergot poisoning. But the other thing is it can also lead to gangrene, and it can lead to LSD-like hallucinations because the ergot toxin, sometimes it can affect the brain, and it will cause, sometimes it can cause hallucinations, and, sometimes that goes away and sometimes it doesn't. So the person, depending on the person, they may have to be admitted to a hospital long term, to treat these other issues besides just the vomiting and diarrhea. Another type of fungal toxin is called aflatoxin. Aflatoxin is from a fungus called Aspergillus flavus, which is a type of mold. It can make humans sick when it infects our food, but it can also make a lot of livestock sick because it gets into the feed of cows and horses and pigs, and it can make farm animals really, really sick. But then it can also make humans sick, and then there's a possible link to cirrhosis and liver cancer with this type of toxin as well. So if you happen to have this kind of mold growing, in your house or something, and you somehow ingest it, that can actually cause liver damage because your liver is trying to detoxify the toxin, and it's causing damage to your liver because of that. Okay, protozoal diseases. So there is actually quite a few protozoans that will cause gastrointestinal problems in humans. One of the more common ones is called giardiasis, which is backpacker's diarrhea. The organism's name is Giardia intestinalis. It's called backpacker's diarrhea because you often will get this disease from unclean water sources. So if you're out in the woods and you're camping or you're backpacking or you're hiking and you drink some water from a river or a stream or a lake or something like that, if it's a freshwater organism, if that water is contaminated with Giardia and you you ingest it, it's going to give you some really, really bad diarrhea. It's probably along the same lines as like the E. coli. It's not going to be as bad as like cholera or even salmonella, that kind of stuff. But it's still really, really bad diarrhea. And of course, if you're out in the woods and you're going to be camping for a long time, it's not going to be a pleasant experience, that's for sure. Another one is called cryptosporidiosis, which is caused by an organism called Cryptosporidium. The organism's life cycle is similar to toxoplasma, and the disease is actually similar to cholera. So this one is actually quite a bit worse than Giardia is. Cyclospora is another protozoal organism that causes diarrhea. This one is especially dangerous to anyone with a suppressed immune system. So again, we're talking about very young children, the elderly, and people with HIV or AIDS. And amoebic dysentery, which is caused by an amoeba. It's called Entamoeba histolytica. This one is really, really horribly bad. This is probably the worst gastrointestinal disease there is. And I am just about out of time, so we'll just have to pick up right here in the next video.